Welcome back, YouTube. This video is for all of you out there who are finding it hard to build muscle. So if you feel like you're doing everything right with your training and nutrition, but you're still not building a ton of muscle or are simply adding a lot of body fat instead, stick around as today I'll be sharing with you what I think are some of the most common mistakes that people make with muscle building, how quickly you should expect to build muscle, and some practical tips to help you set yourself up on the right path towards your muscle building goals. As always, you'll find timestamps below. Before we get there, I am curious to hear from you guys. What do you struggle with the most when it comes to muscle building? Is it a case of finding the right balance with your training, or being able to eat enough calories, or something else entirely? Let me know down in the comment section. And while you're there, please do drop this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Not only does it help keep you up to date with what I'm doing on here, it also helps to support the growth of this channel so I can keep creating free content just like this for you guys. So to begin with, it helps to understand a little bit about how muscle building works as a whole. In very basic terms, muscle building occurs as a response to your brain receiving a few different signals. Building muscle is a relatively expensive process, so your brain needs to sense that it has sufficient supplies of fuel and recovery, and some sort of stimulus being placed upon your body or your muscles to tell it to direct that sufficient supply of fuel and recovery towards building muscle mass instead of fat mass. Because as you all know, you can't just eat more food, as a lot of the weight gain will go towards body fat instead. And if you simply trained without paying any attention to your nutrition or recovery, you're not going to guarantee much muscle growth either. As a general rule of thumb, it helps to have a guideline on how much weight or muscle you should expect to gain when everything is going well. Then you can use that as a benchmark to gauge your results against to determine whether or not you're making the right choices. Muscle building is very different to fat loss. It's a much slower process. On average, I tell people to shoot for roughly 1 to 2% body weight gain per month. So if you're a 75 kilogram person, that's about 750 grams per month, or 1.65 pounds per month for a person weighing 165 pounds. This is generally a lot slower than fat loss goals, where you might expect a similar sort of response each week instead of each month. Now, there'll be some months where you don't gain much whatsoever, and others where you gain a little bit more. But taken across a rolling average long term, that's what I shoot for. So when you break it down to a weekly figure, you'll see that it's actually quite small. So if you start seeing really big increases on a regular basis that are far beyond this, you can probably assume that you're eating too many calories. And if you're not gaining any weight at all, well, that's your signal to probably eat a bit more food. So let's now start looking at some of the common mistakes and strategies that I use. As I sort of alluded to before, there are three broad areas that we want to be focusing on: training, nutrition, and recovery. We want to be looking at things to optimize this as much as possible. The number one mistake that I see people making with their training is doing far too much volume and this whole concept of junk volume as a whole. Whether it's in the form of too many sets, or choosing inefficient exercises, too many exercises, or too many sessions in a training week. It's all the same thing. Too much work. In terms of how many sets or exercises you should be doing, it's impossible for me to give you a definitive answer on this, as there are so many it depends variables to consider, such as whether you're training to failure, or what exercise you're doing, or what the rest of the workout looks like, and even the order at which you do the exercise that you're doing, as exercises done at the end of the workout often don't contribute as much of a muscle building stimulus as those done at the start due to fatigue accumulation. But most people seem to agree with this rough guideline of around 10 to 20 sets per body part being a good amount to shoot for each week. Again, there'll be times where you go well over this and times where you go under this. But if you find yourself consistently going really far above this or below this, that may be a sign that something is amiss. So if you were to average, say, 2 or 3 sets on any given exercise, that gives you about 3 to 7 exercises that you might do each week. And if you're splitting it up across maybe 2 workouts, that means only about 2 to 3 exercises per workout. So when you see people doing maybe 5, 6 or several more exercises for the same body part, there's probably a good chance that they're accumulating junk volume in that workout. Junk volume is anything that's contributing to your fatigue, but isn't contributing that much to muscle building. It's work for the sake of work, and not for the sake of stimulating your muscle for growth. This could be due to choosing a relatively inefficient movement overall, or adding in extra work after you've already done a sufficient amount of work in the one session. Because once you've stimulated your muscle across its entire contractile range of motion, any extra work isn't going to be adding a ton. And if it does, it's usually also adding a lot more fatigue as well. So if you're struggling with building muscle mass, it's often helpful to reduce the number of exercises and sets that you do, whilst ensuring the exercises that you do choose are the most efficient choices. Now, I've already done a full series on the best exercises that I recommend for all body parts. I'll leave a link up to the playlist up here in the corner and down below in the description box for you guys to check out. So if you need some guidance on choosing efficient exercises, I'd probably start there. And if you're looking for a complete program that puts everything together for you, check out my website, Gambaru Method, where I have over a dozen full 12-week programs and plug-and-play one-off workouts covering a variety of goals for people of all experience levels. There's a free trial available, and again, you'll find a link in the description box below. So, moving on now to nutrition. We all probably know that in order to build muscle, we need to eat more. Using the 1 to 2% per month rule, it'll be easy enough to determine how much that is for you, as you can simply see if the scales are progressing in the right direction and continue to increase calories as needed if they're not. It's pretty simple. But this is where I see a lot of people making big mistakes. First of all is they're not tracking their intake whatsoever. When it comes to fat loss, people are very good at coming to terms with the idea that they need to be tracking what they're eating to some degree to ensure that they don't overeat. But with muscle building, people often get lazy with it and just start eating more and going off plan and going off how they feel more than anything else. But once you actually log it for a couple of weeks, it's quite common to find that these people are eating at roughly maintenance intake or even well below into more of a deficit. So firstly, make sure you've got some kind of calculation how many calories, protein, carbs, and fats you should be aiming for each day. Then start actually tracking this as much as possible to ensure that you're eating that amount consistently, especially for the first few weeks, as that's where things can be more difficult to adhere to. Long term, you don't have to track all the time, but it is definitely a useful tool to rotate in and out on a needs basis. So once I get people tracking things, after they realize they've been severely under-eating, the next common question I get is how to consume more calories when you don't have an appetite. I understand this. When I went through a lot of my big muscle building years, I would be force feeding a lot of the time, and it was a real struggle and an effort to get enough calories in. The biggest mistake that I was making, that I still see so much out there in the industry, is having an over-reliance on typical bodybuilding clean foods like chicken breast or sweet potato and oats. From a young age, it was instilled in me that fatty cuts of meat like chicken thighs or anything other than lean beef was bad. I used to be given a meal plan and I'd stick to it perfectly, even when it had arbitrary rules about good or bad foods or clean versus dirty foods and cheat meals. You've got to understand this, and that there are no clean or dirty foods and there are no good or bad foods. There are simply foods that are higher in calories or lower in calories, higher in nutrients and fiber or lower in nutrients and fiber. Some that you might enjoy to eat and others that you don't enjoy to eat, and some that digest well for you and others that don't. That's it. Now, that's not a license to eat nothing but cupcakes, cookies, burgers, pizzas, and French fries every meal every day. Not because they're bad foods, but because it's probably hard to get the right amount of protein, carbs, fat, calories, nutrients, and fiber in that you need eating that kind of diet. But in the same breath, it also means you don't have to just eat a set number of foods that have been categorized as clean, like lean beef, chicken or turkey breast, white fish, brown rice, or sweet potato. There's a sweet spot between these two extremes here that no one can tell you what that is exactly. You'll have to work it out for yourself, based on your goals and your preferences. For me personally, I don't have anywhere near as big as an appetite as I used to have when I was bodybuilding, so I only eat 3 proper meals in a day. And I find it hard to get enough calories from these meals to support my goals and all the training that I do with my gym work and jiu-jitsu. So I often add in things like chips, cookies, fruit juices, and shakes that are easy for me to get down, as well as very nutrient dense and calorie dense to help me stay within my targets. Now, finally, we can look at the other extremely important factor that influences your ability to build muscle mass. recovery, which includes stress management, sleep, and the lifestyle habits you create for yourself around these areas. If your body isn't getting sufficient sleep or is under an excessive amount of chronic stress, this will hamper your ability to both handle significant amounts of training volume, and it will put the handbrake on your ability to build muscle, as your brain is constantly trying to manage this stress response instead of diverting those precious finite resources towards building muscle mass. Now, to talk at length about these and all the strategies to improve these things is of course a whole topic in itself, but for starters, you should be doing your best to ensure that you're getting an average of roughly 7 to 9 hours sleep per night, ideally uninterrupted at the same time each day, along with some sort of daily mindfulness-based practice for stress relief. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean meditation. I simply mean any activity that forces you out of the constantly wired, dopaminergic brain mindset of constantly being switched on, of ruminating on thoughts, and most importantly, creating a lot of extra mental stress for yourself, particularly around the future, whether it's a future that's a few hours away, such as what you'll be having for dinner, or a long-term future of how you're going to be able to afford a house. This is why things like coloring books and jigsaw puzzles are so popular in that community, because they force you to be present and to get out of the day-to-day stress and to focus on the task at hand without any distractions. Otherwise, you end up coloring out of the lines, or you find yourself unable to match up any pieces in the jigsaw puzzle. I personally like things like reading fiction novels, playing the guitar, gaming, skateboarding, jigsaw puzzles, and I'm currently teaching myself Spanish as well. All of which I can't have any distracting thoughts entering my mind as it pulls me out of the experience. For muscle building goals specifically, I do think it's really important to have a non-exercise related mindfulness activity, such as reading or gaming or playing a musical instrument, as opposed to adding more exercise to your regime. As important as daily activity and exercise is, more intense sports and exercise winds up adding even more stress and more training volume to your system that your body has to try to recover from. And that may impact your overall recovery and your muscle building potential. And if you don't have anything like this in your current practice, it's absolutely time for you to start. You'll be surprised just how much of an improvement it makes to your sleep and overall stress levels. So there you go, guys, a quick guide to building muscle. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you have any other questions, please do drop them in the comment section below. Thank you all for sticking around to the very end of this video to help skew the YouTube algorithm in my favor, and I'll see you all next time.